How you doing, everybody? My name is Dr. Sami Baya. Please welcome back to my YouTube channel. Why grief from narcissistic relationships never truly ends. That's the title of this video. The emotional scarring. Grief from narcissistic relationships often lingers far longer than one might expect, primarily because of the deep emotional scarring left behind. Narcissistic abuse is not just a series of isolated events, but rather an ongoing erosion of a person's self-worth, trust, and identity. The emotional wounds inflicted in such relationships can be complex, and the psychological impact may not manifest immediately. These wounds, over time, form scars that can last a lifetime. The gaslighting effect. One of the most insidious aspects of narcissistic relationships is the use of gaslighting. Narcissists manipulate their victims into doubting their reality, memories, and perceptions. The confusion and self-doubt caused by this behavior can extend far beyond the relationship, causing the individual to struggle with understanding what is real and what is fabricated. Even after the relationship ends, the victim may continue to question their own thoughts, making it harder to heal from the pain. In narcissistic relationships, the victim often loses a sense of who they are. Narcissists have a tendency to control, demean, and belittle their partners, leaving them unsure of their worth. Over time, the victim becomes so entangled in the narcissist world that their sense of identity is warped. After the relationship ends, the grieving process is compounded by a loss of self. Rebuilding a sense of self-worth and identity becomes a long, painful journey that never truly feels complete. The concept of trauma bonding is central to why grief from narcissistic relationships never truly ends. So, the trauma bond is another reason. Narcissists are masters of intermittent reinforcement, offering love and affection just enough to keep the victim emotionally invested. These periods of love bombing create an emotional high that contrasts sharply with the periods of manipulation, cruelty, and neglect. The victim becomes addicted to the positive moments, creating a bond that is almost impossible to break. The trauma bond often causes the victim to long for the narcissist's approval, even long after the relationship has ended. Victims of narcissistic abuse often experience intense self-blame, constantly questioning what they could have done differently or why they didn't leave sooner. Narcissists frequently play on this self-doubt, making their victims feel as if the abuse is their fault. This pattern of self-blame continues even after the relationship ends. The victim might blame themselves for not recognizing the abuse sooner or for not having enough strength to leave. This cycle of self-recrimination keeps them locked in the grief process, unable to fully release the pain. Rejection of healing is another reason. Narcissists often devalue and discard their partners without warning or compassion, leaving them feeling abandoned and rejected. Even though the relationship may end, the emotional wounds of being cast aside in such a cold, callous way persist. The grief from this abandonment is compounded by the narcissist's lack of empathy, making it difficult for the victim to process the loss. They may never receive closure, which makes it harder to heal and move on. The other thing is living with unresolved anger. Anger is a natural response to narcissistic abuse, but it's often unresolved. The narcissist rarely takes responsibility for their actions, which prevents the victim from experiencing the catharsis of confronting the abuser and working through their anger. Without the opportunity to express or release their frustration, the victim often remains angry for years, prolonging the grieving process. This anger can be self-directed too, with the victim resenting themselves for having stayed in the relationship as long as they did. The lack of closure is also another reason why grief from narcissistic relationships never truly ends. Closure is a vital part of the healing process, but narcissistic relationships rarely allow for it. Narcissists are notorious for refusing to engage in meaningful discussions about the relationship's end or the hurt they caused. The victim is often left with unanswered questions, doubts, and a sense of incomplete emotional resolution. Because closure never comes, the grief continues, with the person constantly replaying scenarios in their mind, trying to make sense of the relationship and its abrupt, unresolved ending. The other reason why the grief doesn't end with a narcissist is because of fear of the future. Victims of narcissistic abuse often develop an intense fear of future relationships. The narcissist's betrayal, manipulation, and gaslighting make the victim wary of trusting others again. They might fear that future partners will also deceive, control, and abuse them. This fear prevents the victim from moving forward, keeping them trapped in a cycle of grief. The longing for love and connection is overshadowed by the anxiety of facing another heartbreak, which may feel inevitable due to past trauma. Victims of narcissistic abuse sometimes internalize the narcissist's critical voice. Over time, they begin to adopt the same negative, demeaning self-talk that the narcissist once used to control them. This internalized narcissism makes it difficult for the individual to feel worthy of love or success. The abusive words and actions of the narcissist echo in their mind long after the relationship has ended, perpetuating feelings of inadequacy and worthlessness. Isolation from support systems is also another reason why the grief from narcissists does not end even after the relationship is over. Narcissists are often skilled at isolating their victims from their support networks. They create rifts between the victim and their friends and family, making the individual feel alone and unsupported. When the relationship ends, the victim may feel like they have nowhere to turn, as they have already been cut off from the people who might help them heal. This isolation compounds the grief, leaving the victim to struggle with their emotions in solitude, which can make recovery seem impossible. People who have been in narcissistic relationships often find themselves obsessively revisiting the past, trying to piece together the truth and understand what went wrong. They may replay conversations, actions, and moments in their minds, trying to find clarity. This mental rumination keeps them stuck in the past, unable to fully release the relationship and its emotional hold. The constant revisiting prevents healing from taking place, making the grief seem like a never-ending cycle. Narcissists are also known for making their partners feel inferior and unworthy. Over time, this constant undermining takes a significant toll on the victim's self-esteem. After the relationship ends, the victim may continue to feel inadequate, questioning their value and doubting their ability to succeed in future relationships or endeavors. The grief from the abuse is compounded by a deep-rooted sense of not being good enough, which continues to affect every aspect of their life. There's also the fear of being vulnerable again. Narcissist abuse often involves manipulation of the victim's vulnerability. Narcissists exploit weaknesses and use them against their partners, which makes it incredibly difficult for the victim to open up to others after the relationship ends. The fear of being vulnerable again prevents them from forming deep, trusting relationships, leaving them emotionally isolated and stuck in grief. The trauma of being hurt in such a personal way makes the thought of trusting someone else seem impossible. Narcissists are also known for their profound lack of empathy, and this is a key reason why the grief from the relationship never fully resolves. When the narcissist discards their victim, they rarely acknowledge the pain they caused or express any remorse. This lack of empathy leaves the victim feeling invisible and unimportant, compounding the grief. The victim may mourn the relationship not just for the love lost, but for the empathy they never received. Narcissists are skilled at making their victims doubt themselves, their decisions, and their emotions. Over time, this creates a persistent sense of uncertainty that continues long after the relationship ends. The victim may question their ability to trust their instincts or make sound choices, perpetuating a sense of self-doubt that hinders their healing process. The grief is compounded by an ongoing internal struggle to regain confidence and trust in oneself. In a narcissistic relationship, the victim is often treated like an object rather than a person. Narcissists view their partners as extensions of themselves, to be used and discarded as needed. When the relationship ends, the victim may feel like they were never truly loved for who they are, but only for what they provided to the narcissist. So they feel like an object. This objectification leads to a deep sense of worthlessness and grief as the victim struggles to accept that they were never truly seen or valued. Overwhelming loneliness is another reason. The loneliness that follows a narcissistic relationship can be suffocating. Narcissists often isolate their partners, making them feel as though they are entirely dependent on the narcissist for companionship and emotional support. After the relationship ends, the victim is left with a profound sense of loneliness, not only because they have lost the relationship, but because they may have been isolated from their social circles for so long. This loneliness amplifies the grief and prolongs the healing process. The other reason is fear of repeating the cycle. Grieving from a narcissistic relationship often involves a fear of repeating the cycle with another narcissist. The victim may feel like they have learned nothing or have somehow failed to protect themselves from being manipulated once again. This fear can be paralyzing, preventing them from trusting their instincts and moving on. The victim might fear that every new relationship will be tainted by the past, further delaying the emotional recovery. Ultimately, the grief from a narcissistic relationship never truly ends because the healing process is not linear. The scars left by emotional abuse can take years, if not a lifetime, to heal. The wounds are deep, and the journey towards recovery requires patience, self-compassion, and support. It is not a process that can be rushed or easily resolved, because the individual learns to reclaim their sense of self and heal from the trauma. They may find that the grief eventually becomes manageable, but it never truly disappears. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you've not done so. Thank you.